you've ever reached for a book while in the bottom of a reading slump, chances are you're reaching for a light romance, contemporary fiction, a little thriller, perhaps even the darkest dark romance with the most questionable smut you can find. Odds are you're not looking for a brand new 14-book fantasy series to start on a Tuesday afternoon during your lunch break from work, but you have that itch for fantasy, to escape this reality into one with elements and systems not of this world. Believe me, I get it. You want accessible, easily digestible, something you can start and finish and get that more instant feeling of gratification from finishing something in your life. No sequels required, no encyclopedic lore needed, just immersive stories that make you forget to clock back into reality. Whether you're brand new to the fantasy genre or you're simply looking for a fun-sized fantasy to put in your pocket between bigger reads, I've got you covered. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Neverland Book Club. Before we get started, do me a favor, click that subscribe button. Oh, and while you're at it, go ahead and tap on that bell. Good? Good. Let's get into the 5 standalone fantasy novels to get you, dear reader, out of a reading slump. First up, we have one of my top 10 books of all time, The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. When I tell you the chokehold this book had on me from the very first page, Morgenstern really understands the art and joy of reading just as well as writing. Her style envelops you so entirely, you remember her stories like you would your very own dreams. The Starless Sea follows a young man named Zachary who discovers a mysterious book. Inside that book is a story about him. This discovery pulls him into a hidden subterranean world, a labyrinth of underground libraries and doors that lead to impossible places. The pacing is slow and enticing. The plot is made up of loose strands of ideas weaved together coherently. It's a vibe-heavy, atmospheric experience. Look forward to beautiful, poetic, purple writing, a sense of mystery that slowly unfolds rather than simply explains itself, and interconnected stories that just leave you feeling so satisfied in the end. Morgenstern leans heavily into symbolism, theme, but most of all, mood. You'll feel as though you're exploring a maze, and every turn reveals something both strange and possibly meaningful. This book was a story about stories, about storytelling. So if any of that sounds like it may be your cup of tea, please read The Starless Sea. I also have a full video on it linked somewhere if you want to go check that out. Next we have Hemlock Silver by T. Kingfisher. Where Morgenstern writes within the watercolor lines of the dreamy and abstract, Kingfisher moves within the solid reality of magic. Grounded, yet still embodying the right amount of whimsy. Hemlock Silver follows a woman obsessed with poisons and their cures. After establishing herself as a healer, she's approached with the inciting incident of a summons by the king, requiring her assistance in curing his daughter. That's all I'll say, even though the blurb on the jacket reveals far more, but I don't want to risk it. This little book was such a fun, refreshing ride. I believe it would make a great starter fantasy because of how approachable and human it still feels while introducing elements of fantasy. The main character is strong and relatable, not an illiterate 19-year-old huntress, though that's fine too. She's written with the most dry and witty humor that just cuts through tension and dark moments in the narrative, and there's a steady sense of building unease that never becomes too overwhelming, which I found kept me coming back for more every time I'd pick up the book, again, in a far more intentionally fun way, you know? Kingfisher has a very distinct tone. She mixes creepy fairy tale energy with a bit more contemporary, almost conversational writing style, making each one of her stories feel both otherworldly and fathomable. There's no dense world building or complicated magic systems. She instead focuses on character, atmosphere, and gradually revealing mystery. So if you're looking for either a fantasy starter or a fantasy refresher, anything by T. Kingfisher may do the trick. But this one in particular, I enjoyed personally. Now, let's talk about Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, another book I did a full review on years ago. This is easily one of the most unique books on this little list. I still see this book in my head sometimes. I still imagine wandering the vast halls and vestibules of the house and watching as the tides flow through its lower levels. I imagine being Piranesi, the only living thing and keeper of this infinite world of a house. I think of how the story unfolds with every new discovery and how each inconsistency begets more questions. Slowly, the truth behind the house, behind Piranesi's place within the walls, begins to take shape. This book was so deeply immersive and hypnotic. Mystery and fantasy wrapped in one, with a main character who is so genuine and kind and just novel in his innocence and curiosity. At times, this also felt like an exploration of psychological and sociological ideas. An introspective fantasy not about quests or wars, but discovery, perception, and one's understanding of their own reality. Clarke has a way of layering her writing styles depending on the character in the driver's seat. And though we might be limited to the perspective of the first-person narrator, Piranesi, we are not limited in our knowledge of the world. We know more than the character, and at the same time, we can only know what he knows. As readers, we are asked to put aside what we think we know and follow what Piranesi is yet to know, you know? Anyway, not only was this book so memorable, it was also pretty short, which makes it a great starter fantasy if the big, bulky dragon books are too scary for you. I also think this is a good starter if you're not into the dragon flavor of fantasy at all and are looking for something a bit more reflective, thought-provoking, and of course, standalone. If you're interested in hearing more about what I thought on the story, go watch that video. Alright, going from one extreme to the other, the last two books on this list are titles I have yet to read, but looked like good options when researching this video. Stardust by Neil Gaiman. Now, despite being a fan of Gaiman's stories and style, I have not read a great deal of his titles, and that needs to change. Perhaps starting with this one. According to the blurb on Goodreads and what I could surmise from the better reviews, Stardust is a classic magical adventure capturing the essence of old-school fairy tales. A young man living in a small English village on the border of a magical realm promises to retrieve a fallen star for a woman he's trying to impress. But of course, when it comes to magical items and realms, nothing is what you might expect. I believe there are witches and otherworldly creatures, which always make up for great fantasy storytelling, using a whimsical and adventurous tone. If this title is anything like Gaiman's other stories, I'd expect his clear and engaging narrative style with a more straightforward approach to fantasy, and of course, the tone being slightly dark, slightly humorous, and slightly strange, with an ending adorning a satisfaction guaranteed sticker. This title is also pretty short. I'll let you know what I think of it, of course, in a future wrap-up, so stay tuned for that. Because I'll also notify you when I read the next book on this list, Uprooted by Naomi Novik. I've only read one other book by Novik, which was A Deadly Education. It wasn't my absolute favorite dark academia novel as far as the story was concerned, but I did really enjoy Novik's humor and writing style, so I want to give her another go. I believe this is the closest thing on this list to a more traditional fantasy adventure type of novel, while still completely self-contained and beginner-friendly to the genre. There are definitely mixed reviews on Goodreads, and I was skeptical in placing it on this list, but I'm curious, so I'm gonna read it. The story centers on a village that lives in fear of a corrupted forest known simply as the Wood. Every 10 years, a wizard takes a young woman from the village to serve him, supposedly as protection against the forest, I think. Of course, our main character is chosen, thus begins the adventure into the wood. Now, what I'm hoping for going into this read is a main character that doesn't feel like a carbon copy of Galadriel from A Deadly Education. Something tells me Novik tends to gravitate towards a character archetype when it comes to her FMCs, so I hope I'm wrong. Though I hope I'm right in predicting a high-stakes, darker type fairy tale atmosphere with a compelling mix of magic, danger, and dark humor. But of course, I'll keep you posted. Maybe subscribe. Click that bell. All right, that's all for my list of beginner fantasy. I'm sure I'll have another one at some point. About half was recommendations and half a bit of a TBR, so do with that information what you will. I was hoping to curate a list with a little something different with each choice. The Starless Sea is atmospheric and mystical. Hemlock and Silver is more character-driven and slightly eerie. Piranesi is for when you're in a more introspective mood. Stardust is a classic magical adventure fantasy, and Uprooted was my wild card, leaning more towards traditional fantasy elements. I hope this list aids you and your journey, dear viewer, and you may be more open to choosing fantasy on your next trip to your local bookstore. I know I'll be looking for certain titles. And if you do venture into the bookstore, maybe, just maybe, you'll bump into something a little like this, treading the line between romance and fantasy, because what's more fantastical than a bit of spicy romance, am I right? Alright, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you're not. Your comments are also always welcome, whether they be recommendations or what you thought of your latest reads. Every bit of engagement helps. Today's shoutout goes to Cassie Motinka123. My dear Cassie, you are asking the right questions, and I'm afraid I don't have an answer for you. But nonetheless, there's nowhere on the internet I would rather be, so you know where to find me. Alright, I'm off to go outline my own fantasy novel to obsess over as yet another form of escape. Stay lost, keep reading. Goodbye.